Starting us off at number 10 is Cursed Like a Sailor. One nurse who works in the ICU took to Reddit under the name CABC, posting the weirdest thing a patient ever said to them. They start off by saying, quote, "I had a gentleman who was DNR on comfort care. He was demented and was cursing like a sailor. He seemed to have moments of clarity and when asked to see his brothers, who were both dead." Now, that all by itself, not creepy whatsoever. I mean, nurses are definitely used to an array of colorful language, considering how much of their days are spent with people in immense pain. But after a particularly worrisome heart rhythm, his rate started speeding up exponentially, and she began to think that this might be the end. At that moment, Reddit user says, quote, "The patient looked at me in the eyes and said, 'What's your name?' To which I replied, 'My name.' He asked, 'What do you do here?' 'I'm a nurse,' I replied. The dying man was quiet for some time, then out of nowhere he just said, 'F you,' and died in silence 20 minutes later. I mean, what was the reason? Coming in at number 9 is Paint the House. Maybe it's just me, but I think the biggest question people have about dying is, will they get to see those who have already died wherever it is they are going? It's the whole what really happens to us when we die that likely plagues most of us. So maybe this isn't the darkest on the list, but it's still a bit odd nonetheless. In a post made by a now deleted Reddit account, the nurse explained one of the strangest and simultaneously comforting things they've ever heard. The post said they overheard a conversation between a patient and their grandchild. The grandfather was fading fast, but he turned to his granddaughter and said, quote, Dar, I can't hang around. Your grandma needs me to paint the house." The granddaughter was just about to remind him that her grandma had been dead for several years and there was no house to paint. Then he died right there and then in front of her. The Reddit user claims that while a bit strange, she likes to think that he really was living in his afterlife with his wife painting their house. Next up at number 8, he knew. This one comes from Reddit user Paper Rainbow, and they start off by saying that they came into work for an early shift and were handed over to a patient who had been experiencing high levels of anxiety, including a panic attack the previous evening. Reddit friend continues on saying that all morning the patient had still been quite anxious, but was showing nothing that was concerning and that tests were still coming back fine. So they were merely there to sit with him and make sure he felt okay. But then things started getting weird. The patient starts getting worse, breathing, lying in fetal, and looking like they're on the brink of another panic attack. So the Reddit user tries to reassure them, saying doctors will be here in 10 minutes and to please lie on his back so that they can better monitor his breathing. He refuses, saying, quote, "I won't make it until they get here and I won't face the other way." Still, the patient continued to be really agitated, so this time the nurse suggested to move for comfort. That's when he said, quote, "I won't make it until the doctors get here. If I turn to face the other way, I'll be gone." The patient repeated this phrase over and over and over. Then sure enough, as soon as the doctors walked in, he turned to the other side and died. I mean, that can't have just been a coincidence. Coming in at number 7, I understand. In a now deleted Reddit account, one nurse posted saying that although they had heard many strange or concerning last words from a patient, that this one was the creepiest. They started off by explaining that the man was obviously on his deathbed and that they knew he didn't have much time left, as he was experiencing renal failure. Apparently the patient has been pretty quiet for some time, but then all of a sudden his eyes got wide and he loudly yelled, "I see a bright light. Horses. No eyes. No, no, no." He then fell asleep for a bit, and Reddit user goes on to say that he woke up, looked up, and with his last breath he said, quote, "I understand." And he died right at that moment. The user finished off by explaining that, quote, "We know in the medical field that these situations are provoked by a cascade of neurotransmitters in disarray due to tissue and organ failure. But I sometimes have my doubts, and perhaps we are seeing more than we are led to believe." Coming in at number 6 is the Grim Reaper. Hallucinations can apparently be a normal occurrence for patients nearing death due to the high amount of pain meds they're on. But that doesn't mean that what they say still can't haunt you to your core, mostly cause you never really know what the truth is. One Reddit user named Koyena posted about a patient they had had one night that said, quote, "The devil has been in my room all night, but don't worry, God is with you. Then that night, after a horrible and brutal seizure, the man died with his eyes wide open and a creepy grimace plastered across his face. They explained that prior to the seizure, the man had been screaming at the devil in their room and kept shouting over and over, "Get out of here, the building's gonna blow." Now, thank God, nothing actually ever happened to the building, but still, the last thing this person ever said was that they were being haunted by the devil, and then they died with a haunting expression on their face. So, definitely unsettling. Coming in at number 5, DNR. Reddit user Callie Asari posted a few years back about one DNR patient they had had that really affected them for a long time after they died. So first off, DNR, if you don't know, stands for Do Not Resuscitate, which means that the patient has opted out of any and all life-saving treatments. Reddit friend starts off by saying, quote, "The patient was on a high dose of morphine and hallucinating. She would alternate between grasping for things not there and trying to climb out of bed. She was too unsteady to walk, so my job was to sit in the room and make sure she was safe. The patient apparently continued trying to get up, so the nurse simply asked, 'What do you need? I'd be happy to get it for you.' To which the woman grabbed her arm, pulled her in close, and said very angrily, quote, 'Kill me.' Safe to say the nurse was expecting her to ask for some water or something. Obviously the nurse did not kill her, but she did die soon after, and that was the last thing she said before she died. Pretty creepy, if you ask me. Coming in at number 4, a confession. Okay, so this one isn't from a nurse, it's actually from a surgeon, but it's really creepy, so I'm still counting it. There is a lot you might expect someone to confess on their deathbed. Cheating scandals, admitting that they hated something or someone, that they were a drug addict, or maybe there was a secret undercover agent. But this story posted to Reddit by the user Really Unbelievable a few years ago honestly sounds like the start of every plot of a true crime doc I've ever heard of. They say, quote, "Not sure if this is creepy, but a man on his deathbed kept repeating, 'The body is in the woods next to the oak tree,' over and over and over again until he passed." Yes, that is creepy, I would say. Was this man confessing to killing someone and hiding the evidence? Apparently police got involved and they ended up searching the area the patient had mentioned but never recovered any evidence of a body. True, it could have been nothing, but that doesn't really seem like something you'd say without any grounds to back it up. Coming in at number 3, hemorrhaging. This next story was by a now deleted Reddit account and might be one of the goriest stories I've ever heard. The patient was hooked up to a trach, which is a tube connected to your neck that helps you breathe when the patient is not able to do so themselves. A Reddit user says, quote, "I walked up to her and saw bright red blood just started shooting up the vent circuit and immediately obstructed it. This wasn't the first time they'd seen something like this, so they turned to the surgeon and explained that the patient was hemorrhaging, to which the doc apparently replied that it was just a little bit of blood, assuming the nurse was referring to the access site in her groin. The nurse knew that there was no time to waste, so they popped off the vent, but it was worse than they had even imagined. Blood started pouring out of her trach, mouth and nose at an exceeding rate until a pool about 6 feet in diameter circled them on the floor and they were covered from chest down. They said after a few minutes the patient used her last bit of strength to look into Reddit user's eyes and just say, quote, "Let me die." Coming in at number 2, fire. As I've mentioned, many nurses or medical staff chalk up strange late-stage behavior to pain meds or a way to cope. But this one story by L_3 had her questioning her own sanity for a few days after. Quote, "I had an old lady flag me down in the hallway a few days before she passed, and with her emaciated face and bulging eyes, she said, 'You know where I'm going.' The nurse asked her what she meant by that, to which she replied, 'You know where I'm going when I die, and it ain't up.'" I mean, while it was definitely obscure, our Reddit friend wasn't too freaked out by this point. She simply asked the patient if she would like to see the hospital priest on staff, to which the patient shook her head no and said, "It's too late for that." Then, a few days later, the patient was in bed, eating her dinner, and started screaming. And so the nurse ran in to find her shouting, "Fire, fire, fire! There's fire everywhere." The patient died a few hours later, and the nurse couldn't sleep that night as she was so freaked out that she'd actually witnessed someone seeing the literal fires of hell. And last up in our number 1 spot today is Saw the Devil. Posted by Reddit user Lola CSD 6 years ago, they start off by explaining that their patient was a 20-year-old who had previously been a gang member, then ended up diagnosed with terminal liver cancer. The patient was very angry at the universe, which the the nurse felt sympathy for, considering how young he was when he was dying, but mentioned that he was an incredibly aggressive and angry young man, often spitting in her or his family's faces and calling just about everyone who spoke to him cruel names. His anger only got worse as his condition progressed, but still his family remained by his side. On his last day, the family called in the nurse to the room as he wasn't responding. His eyes were glossed over, his skin cold, and was barely breathing. His mother, in a last attempt to comfort him, whispered to go towards the light, to Jesus, to which the young man came to and shouted, "F your Jesus." Then the nurse said the next part haunted her for weeks. He then slowly turned his head to the left and got the horrific look on his face, as if he was looking at something we couldn't see. And horrified, like in a bad movie, his face contorted and he screamed with his last breath, eyes wide, "Oh shit, oh shit, oh no!" Then made a guttural noise and promptly fell back into the bed and died. I mean, if that doesn't sound like someone seeing hell, then I don't know what does.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Alexander Prokorenko. In 2016, Alexander was a senior lieutenant with the Special Armed Forces of the Russian Armed Forces. He was 25 years old at the time and was fighting in the Syrian civil war. On March 17th of 2016, during the Palmyra offensive, he found himself surrounded by ISIS militants. Not wanting to be captured alive, and also bravely doing what he thought was best, he ordered an airstrike on his location. His command was slightly confused in the beginning of this order and asked him to confirm his order, and that is when Alexander spoke his final words to command. He said, quote, "They're outside. This is the end, Commander. Thank you. Tell my family and my country I love them. Tell them I was brave and I fought until I could no longer. Please take care of my family. Avenge my death. Goodbye, Commander. Tell my family I love them." Alexander left behind his wife Katya and the child that they were expecting at the time of his death. He was nicknamed the Russian Rambo after his death and was awarded the title Hero of the Russian Federation for his ultimate sacrifice. In our number 9 spot today, we have Michael Ney. Michael was the first Duke of Elchingen and was the first Prince of Moskva and was a French military commander in the French Revolutionary Wars as well as the Napoleonic Wars. He was even one of the original 18 marshals of the empire that Napoleon I created. After Napoleon was dethroned and exiled in 1815, however, Michael was arrested and tried by the Chamber of Peers for treason. When the verdict was given, 137 peers voted for the death penalty, 17 voted for deportation, 5 abstained, and there was 1 single vote for acquittal. Unfortunately, this was a majority rule situation and Michael was sentenced to death by the firing squad. On December 7th, 1815, Michael was put in front of a firing squad and he refused to wear a blindfold. He was surprisingly given the right to order the fire himself, and before doing so, these are the final words that he spoke. Quote, "Soldiers, when I give the command to fire, fire straight at my heart. Wait for the order, it will be my last to you. I protest against my condemnation. I have fought 100 battles for France and not one against her. Soldiers, fire." I couldn't imagine having to be the one to order your own death, especially when you don't want to die, so this one definitely leaves quite an eerie feeling. In our number 8 spot today, we have Gregorio del Pilar. Gregorio was a general of the Philippine Revolutionary Army during the Philippine-American War and is known for being one of the youngest generals in the Revolutionary Army at just the young age of 22 years old. He was nicknamed Boy General and was also known for being quite a ladies' man. In 1896, Gregorio finished his Bachelor of Arts and was going on to complete more education, but when the revolution broke out, he enlisted himself for military service. In 1899, the Americans were advancing on the Tiré Pass, and this is the battle that unfortunately was Gregorio's last. He was sadly shot in the neck and died almost instantly. While his last spoken words weren't recorded, it was his final diary entry that I want to talk about today. His final entry read, quote, "The general has given me the pick of all the men that can be spared and ordered me to defend the pass. I realize what a terrible task has been given to me, and yet I felt that this is the most glorious moment of my life. What I do is done for my beloved country. No sacrifice can be too great." It obviously shows how incredibly dedicated he was to his country, and perhaps he had some sort of inkling that this battle just may be his last. At the end of the day, his legacy certainly lives on. In our number 7 spot today, we have Murray Hudson. Murray Hudson was born in 1938 and was a sergeant with the Royal New Zealand Infantry Regiment. On February 13th, 1974, Murray was a drill instructor instructor and was supervising a training exercise when things took a really dark turn. One of the officers in training, or a non-commissioned officer who was participating in this training exercise, accidentally armed a grenade that he was about to throw. This is obviously an incredibly frightening situation, and one that made the officer completely freeze. After all, what do you really do in that situation? Murray saw him freeze and realized what had happened and ordered him to throw it, which I guess is the smartest move and the only thing that you can do. The officer unfortunately was still frozen and wasn't reacting, so in an attempt to save him, Murray went over and took his hand and tried to release the grenade so that he could throw it. During this process, the grenade unfortunately exploded, which took both of their lives. The final words of Murray were his directions and him saying, "Throw it! Just throw it." Such a tragic event that absolutely could have been avoided. Murray was awarded the George Cross after his passing, which is the highest award bestowed by the British government for gallantry not in the presence of an enemy. In our number 6 spot today, we have Sanada Yukimura. During the Warring States period in Japan, there was one incredibly famous samurai warrior. Sanada Yukimura, whose real name was Sanada Nobushige, was an incredible fighter and is best known for being the leading general on the defending side of the siege of Osaka. Sanada is known as a hero and has even been called the #1 hero in Japan. Unfortunately, the summer siege of Osaka Castle was his last, where his haunting last words come from. He ended up being mortally struck, and this is when he stumbled out onto the field while removing his helmet. This is when he said the words, quote, "I am Sanada Nobushige, no doubt an adversary quite worthy of you, but I am exhausted and can fight no longer. Go on. Take my head as your trophy." These truly might be some of the coolest last words ever, and that is sincerely a reflection of the type of warrior he was. In our number 5 spot today, we have Sir Philip Sidney. Sir Philip Sidney was born in November of 1554 and was an English poet and soldier, and is one of the most prominent figures of the Elizabethan era. In 1586, he joined Sir John Norris in the Battle of Zutphen in the fight against the Spanish, but it was during this battle that he was shot in the thigh, which would ultimately lead to his death. One of the most well-known stories about Sir Philip Sidney is when he was lying wounded next to another soldier who was also wounded. He spoke his last words to the other soldier when he was giving him his water. He said, "Take it. Thy need is greater than mine." It seems as though he must have known that he was about to pass, but it also shows the kind of person he was, which seems to be a very noble person. He certainly left a legacy, considering we are still here talking about him today. In our number 4 spot today, we have John Sedgwick. John was born in 1813 and was a military officer and Union Army general during the American Civil War. On May 9th, 1864, he and his men were at Spotsylvania Courthouse, and he was directing different placements when Confederate sharpshooters, who were around 1,000 yards away, began shooting at them. This of course caused for some of John's men to duck for cover like any regular human being would when being shot at. I'm not exactly sure why, but John seemed to have been less concerned with the shots and more concerned with the soldiers taking cover, and he continued to strut around and said, quote, "I am ashamed of you. They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance." It was unfortunately just a few moments later that he was fatally struck by a bullet just under his left eye. His chief of staff, Martin T. McMahon, was close to him and heard his last words and tried to catch him as he fell. Medical personnel were of course called as quickly as possible, but unfortunately he never regained consciousness. In our number 3 spot today, we have Henri de la Tour d'Auvergne. Henri was a French general who has gone down in history as one of the greatest military commanders in modern history. During the Dutch War in the summer campaign in Salzbach on July 27th, 1675, Henri was struck by one of the first shots. I believe it was also a cannonball, so it was just really not a good scene. He laid on the ground, barely able to breathe, when he uttered his last words, which were, quote, "I did not mean to be killed today." Aside from that being very honest, it's also quite sad. I always like to picture people's final moments as peaceful or just hope that they have no idea what's happening, but this was of course not the case for him. After his passing, when his death was announced, people all over were mourning the loss, as he was an incredibly well-respected man. In our number 2 spot today, we have Jan Žižka. Jan is a hero in Czech and was lovingly nicknamed One-Eyed Žižka after he lost one and then both eyes during battle. He is still regarded as one of the most prominent military leaders despite living so long ago, which certainly is quite a legacy. There was quite a bit of time during his life where he and his men were fighting against King Sigismund, who is the king of Bohemia. Jan didn't end up passing away in battle, however. He actually died of the plague in 1492. After his passing, his men called themselves orphans because they felt like they had lost their father, and if that doesn't speak to the kind of leader he was, this next bit definitely will. It has been recorded that his last words were, quote, "Make my skin women into drumheads for the Bohemian cause. While kind of gross in thought, I think it definitely shows his commitment and passion and how he wanted to lead his men into battle any way he could, even after his passing. In our number 1 spot today, we have Maynard L. Beamy Beamsdorfer. Maynard was a World War II hero who luckily went on to live a very long life after his duty was over. He ended up passing away at the age of 92, and really, who could be upset at making it that far in life, especially when you survived such a high-risk job? He passed away in 2016 and was thankfully surrounded by his family, which truly makes his death one of the most pleasant on this list, which I am very glad about. His final words spoken to his family were, quote, "Did I do good?" I think that is both very sweet and quite sad at the same time. It's wonderful that he was able to be around family, and I am certain they assured him that he did, in fact, do very good. I hope in his final moments he really did feel proud of himself, and I hope when he slipped away, he knew the answer to his question.
Number 10. Princess Diana's last words. Okay, since Harry and Meghan were trending recently, I figured we'd open with this one. First responder who actually rescued Princess Diana that fateful day during that fateful crash. The same first responder opened up last year to speak about said incident and even Diana's final words before her untimely death later on August 31st, 1997. Now that day, Diana and her boyfriend Dodi Fayed were being followed by a group of paparazzi in Paris. Just an insane reason to kick off all of this nonsense. But during this chaos, the driver of her car lost control in the tunnel. And there's still a lot of, what happened there going on with the driver. I'll save that for later. Sergeant Xavier Gourbalan was on duty that day and he did not know that Princess Diana was the one involved in that accident. Now he said after Fayed was removed, I was left with the passenger. Now she spoke in English and she asked, "My God, what happened?" She didn't say anything else until she later passed at the hospital. Number 9. Tupac's last words. Chris Carroll, who has since retired from the Las Vegas Metro Police Department back in 2010, at the time he was a bike patrol officer working a night shift on the evening of September 7th, 1996. He was working outside of the MGM Grand Hotel. Now I can't say certain things or details on YouTube because, rules and violations and yada yada yada. But after Tupac was attacked, sure, Chris Carroll was the first responder on the scene. In his words, here's what happened, according to an article on Billboard. Quote, "So I'm looking at Tupac, and he's trying to yell back at Suge." Suge Knight was also involved, of course. "And I'm asking him, who attacked you? What happened? Who did it? Anything, right? And he was just kind of ignoring me. He was making eye contact with me here and there, but overall, he's trying to yell at Suge. And I kept asking him over and over, who did this? Who attacked you? And he basically kept ignoring me. And then I saw in his face and in his movements, all of a sudden, in the snap of a finger, he changed. And he went from struggling to speak, being non-cooperative, to an I'm at peace type of behavior. So just like that, he went from fighting to I can't do it. And then when he made that transition, then he looked at me. And he's looking at me right in my eyes. And that's when I looked at him and I said, one more time, who did this? Who attacked you? And he looked at me, he took a breath to get the words out, and then he opened his mouth, and I thought I was actually going to get some cooperation. And then the words came out, F you. I can't say it, obviously, but yeah, he said F you. He didn't say anything. And at that point, an ambulance showed up and he went into unconsciousness, end quote. How amazing is that? I mean, obviously it's not amazing that Tupac died, but the fact that he went out like that and didn't say anything. Number 8, Dark Revenge. This one was posted by a username, My Dog Operates Better Than You. Great name, really great name. Interesting nurse story, here we go. I did a rotation in a burn unit. There are tons of stories that go around, but I'll share my favorite. A man attacked one of his night workers one night, but as soon as this flame was lit, the victim, she immediately bear hugged him, causing them both to suffer pretty severe injuries, pretty severe burns, and unfortunately, hers included an inhalation burn, so her fate was unfortunately sealed. Later on, they were both being treated in the same ICU on opposite ends, but sadly, weeks later, she ended up coding and passed away. And for about 30 minutes, as things started to quiet down, that guy, that not so great guy that did all this, he starts randomly screaming from his room, "Get her out, get her out." Okay, this one's got layers because it's not her last words per se, but many people have heard this story and have agreed that she was saying some nasty stuff to him before moving on, right? Or else who's he talking about? Either way, I'm sure that's gonna be haunting him at night regardless. Thank you for sharing. My Dog Operates Better Than You. And also, again, great name. Number 7, The Man in Black. Oh, this is scary. This story gave me the creeps when I read it online. Here we go. A nice old lady who told my CNA that she wanted to wear all white. Now, when I asked why, she said that the man in black is here. Now, she looked in the corner of the room. The CNA also looked, but there was no one there. That's when I came into the room. We asked her to describe what she was seeing, and she said, "He's in all black and he's got a top hat on." That's terrifying. "The Hat Man," she said, and then she whispered, "and his eyes are red," while her eyes moved across the room directly to behind that CNA, almost as if she was watching him move closer to us while describing him, which is terrifying. Now, sadly, she died later that night, but it was unexpected. That room creeped me out for a long time after that. It almost reminds me of that story that Aaron Rodgers was telling recently about this weird hat man, like this all black hat man in the shadows that he's seeing after he did some ayahuasca trip. What's everyone seeing? Who is this hat man? I'm terrified. Number 6, hey. This one's from a nurse with username Hella Clogged. Great name, I love these names. When I was a nursing student up on an ICU floor, I was hanging antibiotics in my patient's room when I heard an audible, "Hey." Now, I turn around, as anyone would, and there is no one else in the room, okay? Mind you, my patient was sedated, so there's no possible way that it was them. Also, it was a woman's voice as well, so I thought that it was my preceptor. Now, I went back out to the nurse's station and I asked my coworker if that was her in the room trying to catch my attention, and she told me no, and I've never seen someone's eyes get so large. Apparently, the room that I was in had the most paranormal sightings and activity out of all the rooms in the unit. Awesome. That's lovely to hear. Imagine that. Cool. How do I sign out? Sightings as in shadows in the corner of the room, voices being heard, and curtains being flung violently across railings. Horrible stuff. No one ever told me about this room prior to my preceptorship, so it added to everyone's beliefs that it was actually haunted. That comes from Hella Clogged. Again, great name. Even greater story. That's terrifying. Thank you for sharing. The fact that they followed an invisible force with their eyes, that detail there gave me the most creeps. Thanks for sharing, that's really good. Number 5, a grim plea. This was from a user named Kalasari, and it's about a DNR patient who was on comfort care. They were on a high dose of at the time and they were hallucinating. This is normal, but she would alternate between grasping for things not there and trying to climb out of bed. Pretty alarming. She was too unsteady to walk, so my job was to sit in the room and make sure that she was safe. She tried to get up and I went to ask her what she needed, and she grabbed my arm and pulled me down towards her face and said, very angrily mind you, "Kill me." That one messed with me for a while. Yeah, not all these stories have a silver lining. Some of them are just dark and horrible. Welcome to Most Amazing. There you go. This is what you wanted, right? You click the title, there you are. That depressing feeling in your chest, you got it. Click that thumbs up. Let's keep this grim train rolling. Number 4, paramedic promise. Okay, that last one was dark, but I promise this one will get your hopes back up for humanity. Uploaded by user Henry RN. Back when I was a paramedic in Oakland, I was taking care of an elderly gentleman in the back of my ambulance. He was looking up into the upper corner of the ambulance and he said, "It's okay, Lulu, I'll be with you soon." Kind of comforting. His daughter was with him and told me later that Lulu was his wife who had died 20 years prior. Now, a few minutes later, he sadly went into cardiac arrest and passed away. Okay, great. That's gives me a little bit of hope for the afterlife, afterworld. Also, I'm terrified at the same time. Isn't that lovely? Thank you for sharing, Henry RN. Henry, right now. That is your real name. Number 3, first code. This one comes from Falling Star 24. That's a nice name, it's pretty normal. My first code as a nurse was of a middle-aged mother who we think ended up having a brain bleed. She was ripping her gown off at the time and ripping sheets off the bed, and eventually she yanked off her heart monitor. I was trying to start a blood transfusion at the time, but I needed to get her vitals beforehand, which of course was impossible because she wouldn't stay long enough for any of it to read. I'd given her a sedative and I was praying that it would kick in soon, but she kept grabbing my arm saying, "Come here, look at me, help me," with fear in her eyes that I will obviously never forget. I'm pretty sure I snapped back, "I'm trying," which of course I wish was something comforting now instead. Because then she leaned back, her eyes got droopy, she closed her mouth and then snapped her eyes wide open, but totally glossed over. And that was it. Again, that is from Falling Star 24. I can't imagine having that unfold in front of you in real life in real time. I wouldn't sleep again. All these stories, like kudos. If you do this job, I need these jobs, can't do it. That's crazy. I'm like saying lists online, I'm talking about these people. I'm like, I'm doing nothing. This is nothing. Number 2, I knew it. This comes from username Penguin. Great name, I wanted that one, but you beat me to it. They say I'm an ICU nurse. A patient's son rang the hospital at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night saying that he was sure his dad was dying. His dad had had a severe stroke and was doing okay. Recovery would be difficult, but he wasn't expected to die and was pretty stable at the time. I was looking after him and it was a lot of work because he would try and get up, but then he couldn't walk, so he'd fallen a lot. The son really wanted to come in, even though it was way past visiting hours. But you know, I'll bend the the rules in a good cause. I figured, what the heck? It's a Saturday night. Come on in and sit with your dad. Of course. I'm like, you're a great person for that also. Side note. Sadly, the patient died about 2 minutes before the son walked in the door. It was like a switch was just turned off and he just died like that. The last thing he said to me was, am I bothering anyone? And I told him at that point, of course not, even though he had some very frustrating behavior because of the stroke. Now the son, of course, at that point just started crying and was screaming, but he started saying, I knew it, I knew it, I knew it, over and over again. How the heck he knew? Well, we were all a little bit freaked out. Now I'm freaked out just after saying that story, so thanks. That makes all of us now. Thanks for sharing. And finally, number 1, not your ring. We'll finish on a scary one that's oddly nice. I don't know, here we go. This one comes from Wacky Detective. There's the wackiest detective out there. They say, when I worked at the funeral home, I was told a story about an elderly lady that had died. The husband said he wanted her to be buried with her ring as she never took it off. My coworker was in the morgue and was washing the body. She removed said ring to mark it down in the paperwork, but as soon as she did, a styrofoam head that they used for wigs went flying across the room. At that point, she just said out loud, all right, I'll put your ring back on. And then she did so. And after that, there were no more disturbances. I mean, it's kind of funny, I don't know. I mean, I personally, I would probably faint if that happened to me, but you know, I love how casual your friend was in that scenario. That's what makes it great and gives me hope. Thanks for sharing. Kicking off the list at number 10, Sir Isaac Newton. All right, yeah, we'll start this list off back in the early 1700s. Why not? Let's start crying back in the olden days. Sir Isaac Newton lived until he was 80, and back in the 1700s, living until you're 80, why, that's practically unheard of, right? That's insane. Newton started to experience digestion issues, but come 1727, he blacked out and never woke up again. The man died at 84. His last words were sad, of course, as are all of these on this very sad list that I'm doing, in a hopefully not sad way. But they go as follows. I don't know what I may seem to the world, but as to myself, I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself now and then and finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than the ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. What exactly that means? Let's all talk about it in the comments. Let's try and decipher that. There we go. Number 9, John F. Kennedy. A little more recent, jumping to the 1960s, President John F. Kennedy was killed while riding in a motorcade. We all know this one, of course. I don't have to go into grim detail about what happened here. He was riding alongside his wife, of course, First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, and in front of him there was Texas Governor John Connally and his wife Nellie. They were all rolling along when Nellie said to John, "You certainly can't say that the people of Dallas haven't given you a nice welcome." The president then said back, "No, I certainly can't." And just moments later, that's when he met his fate. Number 8, Alfred Hitchcock. This man went out with a zinger. Classic, what a classic drama queen. Alfred Hitchcock worked alongside famous painters and literary figures throughout history. He's an icon. He teamed up with Cary Grant, Jimmy Stewart, Dorothy Parker, you name it. In his 1945 film Spellbound, Alfred even brought on Salvador Dali, like the real Salvador Dali, to help him with the film's dream sequences, right? He had a vision, he knew what he was doing. He also terrified many people for years to come. It's also a fun one. Hitchcock is known for going great lengths to keep his endings a secret, like Psycho, for example, a 1960s classic. The ad department for the film told audiences to please not give away the ending, as it's the only one they have. That's fun, that's cute. Weirdly mirrors his last words in real life. As he was dying, Alfred said, "One never knows the ending. One has to die to know exactly what happens after death, although Catholics have their hopes." That sounds very Alfred Hitchcocky. Number 7, Steve Jobs. A little more modern, there we go. When I was making this list, I couldn't believe how long it's been since Steve Jobs has passed away. It's been a while. The tech icon's last moments were in 2011. He was surrounded with love. He had beside him his sister Patty, his children, and his partner Laureen. Steve looked above them and said, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." He said "oh wow" 3 times. That's pretty heavy stuff to hear. Steve's last moments were shared furthermore when his sister wrote in his eulogy, "Even now he had a stern, still handsome profile, the profile of an absolutist, a romantic." Number 6, Nostradamus. I predict that you'll hit that thumbs up. That's inappropriate, but we try our best. The astrologer's last words were in itself predictions. And this last prediction he sadly got right. Nostradamus, full name Michel de Nostradam, published a book on prophecies back in 1555, and in it he had 942 pieces of writing. He had these poems that told the future, right? These texts have supposedly hinted towards the JFK attack, meteors hitting Earth, the invasion of France, global warming, you name it. He said some eerie things about such topics, and he also predicted his own death. On paper, he did. It was his last ever prediction. It was July 1st, 1566. His priest said to him, "Until tomorrow," and Nostradamus replied, "You will not find me alive at sunrise." Sadly, he was correct. Number 5, Beethoven. Another icon, another staple in history, the German composer Ludwig van Beethoven. We've recently heard his work in theaters. In Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, Doctor Strange fights the villain with musical notes. He uses these notes. He uses Beethoven's Symphony No. 5 in C minor. Now we've heard Beethoven in IMAX, right? What a time to be alive. When Ludwig was still alive, he faced many health problems. Hepatitis, jaundice, skin diseases, cirrhosis of the liver, and of course, deafness. When his time came on March 26, 1827, the composer was believed to have said, "Applaud, my friends, the comedy is over." This is false. This is not true at all. Beethoven's close friend, Anselm Hüttenbrenner, who was very much present during his friend's passing, he said his last words were about the case of red wine that had just been delivered from his publisher. Ludwig's true last words followed, and they were, "Pity, pity, too late." About the wine. Fair. More than fair. It was a little too late. Number 4, Marie Antoinette. Another older one, but I figured I'd go more Victorian for this list, you know? Instead of like recent celebrities, that's only depressing. We don't want to talk about those. During the height of the French Revolution, Louis XVI of France and Marie Antoinette were both charged with treason. The phrase, "let them eat cake," is often associated with Mrs. Antoinette in this case, but her last words were actually an apology. Not to the people in which they owed it to, but to the executioner whose foot she stepped on whilst approaching the guillotine. Yeah, shows like Game of Thrones make it look easy to say something cool right before your, demise. In reality, I would beg for my life. Looking up at this dude? Yeah, I would plea. I'd be like, please don't do this. I really don't want this to happen. Number 3, Bob Marley. Of course, we have to mention the one and only reggae legend, Bob Marley, okay? Cancer was the reason that this icon met his fate early. The big C, once again. Marley was only 36 years old when he passed away in 1981. Next to him, he had his son Ziggy, and to him he shared the final words. And I think we could all learn a little something something here. He said to Ziggy, "Money can't buy life." Yeah, I'll say that again. Money can't buy life. Not happiness, life. Bob Marley's death was so impactful that the Jamaican government turned this sad day into a national holiday. Yeah, that's a great idea. Live some more of that life. Take the day off. Blast some Marley and, you know the rest. Stuff I can't talk about, light some candles, right? That's an ideal way to mourn somebody as impactful as Bob Marley. I'm here for it. Number 2, Giles Corey. Out of the 27 people who had their lives taken away from them during the 1692 Salem witch trials, 19 were hanged, 17 passed away in prison while serving their sentence, and the last victim, Giles Corey, refused to plead either innocent or guilty. And the law at the time states that you can't be tried otherwise, so he did what was ultimately best for him and his family and his estate. The townsfolk laid a heavy board on top of the 81-year-old man during the witch trials and all that nonsense, and then over the course of 2 days, boulders were slowly added, making the weight more and more unbearable. They were hoping that Giles would admit something, either being innocent or guilty, whatever the case, but every time they asked him anything, Giles responded with, "More weight." How epic is that? Extremely brave. This is something like, it sounds easy, but in reality, I would never do this. I would fold immediately. I would be like, this is so hard. But sadly, after 2 days of this torture, Giles passed away. He fought for so long and did what he could, because if he had gone either of the other 2 ways, Giles would have his property taken away from the town. But since he passed away not admitting guilt, he was still in full possession of his estate, which immediately went to his son-in-law. And finally, number 1, Robin Williams. Okay, I wanted to end on one that really hit home for me personally. I try and bring comedy into these lists whenever I can. It's like, cursed dolls that will haunt your family. I'm like, okay, I try and jazz it up a bit. I try and add some physicality to it whenever I can, brighten the mood. Because I was raised watching this man right here. Robin sadly passed away in August 2014. I was 19 at the time. I still remember the day, right? It was the first celebrity death that actually did something to me physically. And I don't mean for that to sound sensitive, but I grew up with this man, right? He was Like Hook, Aladdin, robots, so underrated, right? Robin's wife Susan Schneider Williams revealed her husband's last words in an interview with ABC, and when the couple was getting ready for bed the night before, his last words were, "Good night, good night." Yeah, I wanted to end on a nice, good, peaceful note instead of something horrible from the 1700s. There we go.
Coming in number 10, we have a visit from grandma. Reddit user at Namus talked about how when they were working as a doctor, his uncle became very ill. He was only 42 at the time, so there was a good chance that he would be able to push through and beat his sickness. He would go infrequently to see his uncle and get updates on how he was doing. There was one day when he came to visit and his uncle told him a story. He said that his mother, the Reddit user's grandmother, had come to visit him last night and told him that everything was going to be okay and she was going to come take him soon. The wild thing was that our Reddit user's grandmother had passed away quite some time ago. They sort of shrugged it off, thinking that he might have just had a dream about her, even though he explicitly said that it wasn't a dream. He said that she came to him and sat on his bed and they talked for quite a while. After he told the story, he passed away in less than 24 hours. That's pretty incredible and comforting. We have no idea what happens after we die. It's one of the great mysteries and we might never know. But hearing a story like this makes it seem like whatever's waiting for you on the other side might be nice and warm and loving. Coming at number 9, we have Yeah, That's It. Porkchop247 wrote in about a time when they worked in the intensive care unit. An older man came in and was actually suffering from a pretty serious infection of sepsis, and they needed to operate on him right away to try and save his life. They got him on the table quickly and they needed to act fast, but right before they put him under so they could operate, he said, "That's it," and he died. Porkchop wrote about how that was kind of common with elderly people. When they would come in sick or hurt and needed help, whether they made it through or not, they had a very cavalier approach to death. They seemed as if they don't care if they made it through. I guess when you've been on the planet for so long, it won't faze you as much to come face to face with death. It's something you've been expecting for a long time, so when it's finally near, you might be thinking, it's about time. My joints have been aching for a decade now. Coming in at number 8, we have What Do You Think? Reddit user Giuseppino was working as a student in a hospital and was having one of his first run-ins with the emergency room. Someone was brought in who had been stabbed multiple times. Our Reddit user was obviously in shock because it was hard to know what to do in this situation, even though you have been trained for it. Nothing really compares to the real thing. So he asked the person if they were in any pain, and the patient responded, "What kind of dumb question is that? I have been stabbed." I took all of the swearing out because I had to clean it up for this channel, but of course this patient swore a bunch of times because they were in an insane amount of pain. It wasn't long after that that the patient died. Our Reddit user remembers this very clearly, and they will deal with situations like that in the emergency room different from now on. Coming in at number 7, we have Taking Blood. Reddit user Clyder wrote in about a time when they were working in a hospital and they had a younger patient come in who needed to have blood taken. It was supposed to be a normal procedure and there wasn't anything reported to be terribly wrong with the patient. They were just feeling a little bit sick. So they went to take the patient's blood, they brought the sample to the lab, and then they came back to see the patient. When they came back, the patient's whole arm was purple and they asked if they could have some water. The doctor said no because they needed to take the patient to the emergency right away. In that moment, they went into cardiac arrest and everyone rushed in to try and get the patient's heart started again. They eventually passed away. Our Reddit user left the room and cried and found their boss and quit on the spot. The thought of the patient asking for water right before they had a heart attack still sticks in her head. The reason that the patient passed away was because they had a bacterial meningitis infection. Coming in at number 6, we have The Great Nurse. Our next story comes from Reddit user Reader F52. They wrote about the time there was an older woman who was very ill in her hospital bed and her whole family was there. The woman was in her bed and started to look very panicked and her eyes were darting around the room. It seemed like she was about to have a panic attack. Then, right in that moment, a nurse who was in the room walked up to the woman and took her hand. She said, "It's okay. You're not alone. We're all here for you." Right as she said that, the woman in her bed laid back and calmly passed away. It was obviously a very sad moment for everyone in the room, but it was also beautiful to see a nurse who knew exactly what to say in probably the scariest moment of that woman's life. It was inspiring to the other nurses around her, and many of them wanted to be able to be that supportive to someone else in their moment of need. Coming in at number 5, we have Spicy Food. This next haunting story comes from Broken Nightlight on Reddit. They said that when they were a kid, they were in the hospital with their family because their granddad was very sick and bedridden. The doctor came into the room to check on his granddad, and right in that moment, his grandfather put his hand on his shoulder and said, "No wonder you never liked my spicy food," and then passed away. The doctor had no idea what this meant, his family had no idea what this meant, and of course our Reddit user was just as confused as to why his grandfather would say this as his last words. Well, it wouldn't make sense until 3 months later. He was eating some salsa and then his throat closed up and he had to be rushed to the hospital. After having a near-death experience, it was found that our Reddit user had a capsaicin allergy, which is mostly understood as an allergy to spicy food. How did his grandfather learn this in his final moments? Did he see an angel come down and let him know what was troubling his grandson? Or did this have nothing to do with anything and it was just a coincidence? I don't think we will ever know. Coming at number 4, we have Bill is Coming. This one kind of creeped me out. It was thrown on Reddit by Atomic Killbox, and it's a story from over 10 years ago. They were a new doctor working in a hospital and they had an older patient come in. It was a 96-year-old woman who was in the hospital even though she was very healthy. She actually was just coming in for a routine checkup. She was there with her son, and right as the doctor came in, the 96-year-old woman started talking about how Bill was going to come in and get her. Her son told the doctor that Bill was her husband who had died a few years ago. This was actually very strange because the woman wasn't senile. In fact, she was very sharp and had superb cognitive function for her age. Well, for whatever reason, she kept insisting that Bill was coming to get her. She even said that Bill came to see her that morning and told her he was going to take her home that night. The doctor did the checkup with the woman and then left the room. Then a code blue was called and everyone rushed into the old woman's room, but she had already passed away by the time the people arrived. One of the wildest parts about this was her son was actually very calm about the whole thing. It must have been a little bit comforting knowing that your mom was with the one she loved when she passed away. Coming in at number 3, we have It's Gonna Happen Tomorrow. It would seem that Reddit has no shortage of creepy stories coming from doctors. This one was from Reddit user IEscapeDNJ. They told a story about the time they were working in a hospital and there was an older woman who was very sick in her bed. She barely spoke because she was on so many meds. Then one day out of nowhere she turned to our Reddit user who was a doctor and she took off her oxygen mask and she said, "I'm going to die tomorrow." The woman put her mask back on and then went back to being silent. This shocked the doctor and she immediately went to contact all of her family. They all drove 4 hours to be there by her side, and sure enough, she died the next day with everyone by her side. Our Reddit user said that this is something that happened over 4 years ago, and this is something that still sticks in her head. Coming in at number 2, we have The Killer. This one is going to stick in your head, but for a different reason. This was thrown on Reddit by Reddit user Baby Bop, and they said that they were working in palliative care and they heard a patient's wife talking to him as he was fading away. She didn't know that the doctor was listening to her, but the words that she had for her husband were both encouraging and terrifying. She said to him, "Jim, you beat that murder charge on that guy you killed. You can beat this." The man didn't end up beating his sickness, and the Reddit user doesn't say if any legal action was taken on these last words. And coming at the number 1 spot, we have The Last Words. This one is very sad but also kinda funny. A Reddit user talked about when their grandfather was sick in the hospital. Their whole family was there to see him, and because it looked like he was going to go, he had to get his affairs in order. He really didn't care about any of this because he just wanted to go. I mean, I get it. In your last moments of your life, do you want to be doing paperwork? Well, apparently our Reddit user's mom came in and said, "Dad, please just tell us where you want to be buried." And he said, "Don't care," and then flatlined right after. That's very sad, but also one hell of a punchline.
Starting off this countdown, we have Jeffrey Dahmer. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of this infamous serial killer. Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, was an American serial killer who murdered and dismembered 17 men and boys from 1878 to 1991. He would pack the victims' body parts into plastic bags and bury them behind his parents' home. Upon searching his home, police found albums full of pictures of body parts, and his place was filled with human remains. Heads were in the fridge and freezer, 2 skulls were on display, and a 57-gallon drum filled with decomposing bodies was found in his room. On top of that, there was evidence that Dahmer would eat some of his victims. On November 28, 1994, he was beaten to death by an inmate. His last words were, "I don't care if I live or die. Go ahead and kill me." Moving on at number 9, we have Robert Alton Harris. Robert Alton Harris was an American kidnapper, thief, and murderer. He was convicted for the murder of 2 boys in San Diego. On April 21st, 1992, he was sentenced to death via gas chamber. But first, let's talk about his last meal. This guy went all out. He had KFC, 2 large pizzas, a bag of jelly beans, and a 6-pack of Pepsi. Now, his last words were, "You can be a king or a street sweeper, but everyone dances with the Grim Reaper." This is actually a misquote from the 1991 film Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. Nonetheless, pretty creepy. Making our way down the list at number 8, we have Clarence Ray Allen. Clarence Ray Allen was an American criminal who played a role in killing 3 people. In 1974, Clarence was on trial for the murder of his son's girlfriend. He had 8 witnesses testify against him. And guess what? He hired a hitman to kill those witnesses. The hitman successfully killed 3 of them and then was caught and turned Clarence in. Clarence died by lethal injection on January 17, 2006. His last words were, "Hoka hey, it's a good day to die. Thank you very much, I love you all, goodbye." Wow. In our 7th spot, we have Eileen Wuornos. Eileen Wuornos, often referred to as the Damsel of Death, killed 7 men. She murdered them, robbed them, and then drove home in their cars. Due to this, she was named America's first female serial killer. Now, she does claim that it was all self-defense and that they tried to assault her, but her stories of the events were very inconsistent. In fact, during an interview with a filmmaker, she claims that it was self-defense, but that she couldn't stand being on death row any longer since she had already been there for 10 years, and she just wanted to die, so that's why she confessed to killing the men. On October 9th, 2002, she was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Her last words were a reference from the movie Independence Day. She said, "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6th. Like the movie Big Mothership and all, I'll be back." Now, people often cut this quote down and say that her last words were just, "I'll be back," but either way, it's pretty creepy and kind of like the Terminator, like, "I'll be back." Moving on to number 6, we have Andre Chikatilo. Andre Chikatilo was a serial killer that confessed to murdering over 50 women. The murders took place from 1978 to 1990. In fact, he's been deemed one of history's sickest serial killers. On February 14th, 1994, he was executed by a gunshot to the head. Just before his death, he said, "Don't blow my brains out, the Japanese want to buy them." And then he was shot and killed. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Carl Panzram. Charles, or Carl Panzram, was an American serial killer, robber, and arsonist. He claims to have murdered 22 individuals. However, only a handful of them have been proved. In his autobiography that he wrote in prison, he also states that he committed thousands of burglaries, robberies, and arsons. On September 5th, 1930, at the age of 39, Carl was killed by being hung. His last words were, "Hurry up, you Hoosier bastard. I could kill 10 men while you're fooling around." In our 4th spot, we have H.H. Holmes. Hermer Webster Mudgett, otherwise known as Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, or H.H. Holmes, was an American serial killer. In 1886, he moved to Chicago and got a job as a pharmacist under the name Dr. H.H. Holmes. However, he was killing people in order to steal their properties. He also got his employees to write him down as a beneficiary so that he would get all the money after he killed them. And then he would sell the bodies of his victims to medical schools. On top of that, he owned a house that was referred to as the Murder Castle. Basically, his home had secret passages, trapdoors, soundproof rooms, gas chambers, and a kiln to cremate the bodies. Eventually, he admitted to 27 murders. However, only 9 were confirmed. Yet, officials believe he had killed closer to 200 individuals. On May 7th, 1896, he was hung. His last words were, "Take your time. Don't bungle it." Moving on to number 3, we have George Engel. George Engel was an anarchist and con artist. He was thought to be involved in the 1886 bombing in Haymarket Square. Although the night of the bombing, Engel was home, he was arrested and charged with conspiracy in the bombing. He was hung on November 11th, 1887. Just before being hung, he said, "Hurrah for anarchy! This is the happiest moment of my life." In our 2nd spot, we have Tom Ketchum. Tom Ketchum, otherwise known as Black Jack, was a famous cowboy that later turned into an outlaw. He committed several robberies and crimes. In 1901, he was caught after a failed train robbery. Looks like they did catch him. Get it? I know, it's bad. While attempting to rob the train, he was shot in the arm and later captured by the police. On April 26, 1901, he was sentenced to death by hanging. His last words were, "I'll be in hell before you start breakfast, boys. Let her rip." Pretty scary. But that's not the worst part. Apparently, the hanging didn't go according to plan. The night before, the executioner tested the rope with a 200-pound sandbag, but then forgot to remove it. So when they went to hang Ketchum, this caused his entire head to just be decapitated. His body then fell to the floor and apparently remained upright on its feet for quite some time. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Dusseldorf Vampire. Peter Kürten, also known as the Dusseldorf Vampire or the Dusseldorf Monster, was a German serial killer. He was responsible for the deaths of around 60 people. And in one case, he actually drank the blood of one of his victims. Hence why they call him the vampire. On July 2nd, 1931, Peter was sentenced to death by the guillotine. But just before he was beheaded, he said this: "Tell me, after my head is chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck? That would be the pleasure to end all pleasures." Yeah, can you see why he's number 1 on the list? That is probably one of the creepiest things I have ever heard.
Coming in at number 10, we have The Ring. A paramedic on Reddit said that they were riding in the back of an ambulance with someone who had just been in a serious car accident. They were losing a lot of blood but still conscious, and it seemed that they were going to make it to the hospital. The last thing that the person said to them was, "Take the ring out of my pocket." It wasn't long after that this person flatlined before they were even able to make it back to the ER. The paramedic didn't go fishing through their pockets to find this ring because, for one, that is illegal and it morally feels very strange. But they never got to find out why this person wanted them to take this ring off of them. There was the chance that they had some sort of head injury from the crash and that they couldn't clearly comprehend where they were. Or maybe it was some sort of family heirloom and this person knew that they didn't have anyone to pass it on to. Maybe they didn't want something so precious to be buried in the ground with them and they thought it should have been passed on to the person who was trying to save their life. And guys, make sure you hit that like button because it really helps us out. Coming at number 9, we have There's Nothing There. Reddit user GunMedic15 said that they had just picked up someone who was going into cardiac arrest. They got them into the back of the ambulance while they were still conscious, and they hooked them up to the EKG monitor so he could check out what was going on with his heartbeat. He saw that he was going into a lethal rhythm, and that sounds like the title of an R&B album from the 90s, but it basically means your heart can't pump blood properly, and you're starting to drift off, and if you don't fix it, you're going to die. Well, this man had enough blood circulating in him to say one last thing before he went. The only thing he said was, "But I don't see a light," and then he was gone. The paramedic tried to bring him back, but he was unable to save his life. We like to think we know what's on the other side, but we really have no clue what happens to us when we die. Coming in at number 8, we have Are You in Any Pain? You have to ask these questions as a paramedic. Now, if you're on the other end of this and you clearly are in a lot of pain, this could seem like a dumb question, but it's just the other party doing their job. That being said, if you're about to die, say whatever you want because nothing matters and we are alone in the universe. So a paramedic talked about when they were tending to someone who had just been stabbed. When he first got there, he said, "Are you in any pain?" And the man said, "Yes, I'm in pain. What the hell do you think? I was just stabbed." The man didn't live very much longer, but at least he went out without holding anything back. I think some of us would rather fake not dying so we don't inconvenience the paramedic with trying to save our life. Coming in number 7, we have the overdose. A paramedic shows up at the scene after someone calls about an overdose. They rushed in to help the person. They were still semi-conscious. They had just taken too much of an opioid and they were drifting off pretty quickly. This person was clearly an addict for quite some time. You could tell by their body that they were wasting away, which was going to make it so much harder to save their life. As the paramedics were putting this person onto the gurney, they said, "I'm scared," then they drifted off. They did everything they could to try and keep this person alive, but there was no luck. It must have been heart-wrenching to have someone in that moment who's looking to you for help and is so frightened. They would just want your help, and it would be so hard to tell them what's going on without making them more afraid. Coming in number 6, we have What's Worth Your Time. An elderly man was being transported to the hospital by 2 paramedics in the back of an ambulance. He was starting to slip away. He was going into cardiac arrest. He turned to one of the paramedics and he said, "I spent too much time vacuuming," and then he drifted off and died. I think that's something that would probably be ringing in all of our minds when we're about to go. What did we really spend our life on? I hope that when I'm going, I don't have negative feelings about how I spent my life. As of right now, I think I'm doing a pretty good job. Coming in number 5, we have Stay Positive. A man in his early 30s was in a terrible car accident. The way that it was described in the Reddit thread was that he didn't have much of a chance surviving even if he was in the emergency room when it happened. They didn't go into detail about what that means, but I'm sure you can tell that it's not good. The man was still conscious as he was being rushed to the ER, so he took his time to ask the paramedic about what was going on with his body. He wanted to know the extent of his injuries. The paramedic gave him a full breakdown the best he could in this stressful moment, and the man who was about to die said, "At least it's not raining." If you're about to go and you can feel your life slipping a way, I guess you could be scared or you could be happy and just hope that whatever is waiting for you on the other side will be something that's even nicer than what you got to experience on this side. I hope that more people feel that kind of security as they're passing on to the other side, no matter what the situation is. Coming at number 4, we have skydiving. Some people who seem healthy can have some pretty serious medical issues. Reddit user Reddit Owns My Life talked about the last words they heard from a guy who seemed pretty healthy on the surface, but this man had an unstable heart arrhythmia. Basically, when his heart was beating, it wasn't doing a good enough job, so he wasn't getting enough oxygen passed around through his body. This would cause him to pass out, and most people don't survive with this for very long. This man with the heart problem in this story described the feeling of going in and out of consciousness as the same feeling you get when you jump out of a plane when you're skydiving. The paramedic said the guy passed out right in front of him, and before he did, he said, "Are you going to take me skydiving again?" And that was the last thing that this man ever said. Coming in at number 3, we have not ready. The whole concept of death is so terrifying because we have no idea what happens. That's why we come up with so many things like religion, astrology, or simulation theory. All of these things are supposed to give us the answer to the unknown. Religion tells us what happens after you die and how you're supposed to live your life. Astrology tells you who you are and why other people are the way that they are, and simulation theory tries to tell us how the universe and reality was created. But really, we don't have the answer to any of these questions, and no matter where you put your faith, when your final moments come, you will most likely feel an overwhelming feeling of insecurity. That is what happened in this experience when this paramedic arrived on the scene after an old woman had had a heart attack. She was still conscious, but she could feel herself fading. She kept saying over and over, "I don't want to die." The paramedic said he could still hear her voice in his head. She didn't make it much longer in the ambulance before she passed away. Coming in number 2, we have a dying secret. In your last moments, if you have anything you want to get off your chest, you better do it right then and there, because there is literally no other time you can do it. Just make sure that you are for sure going to die, because you don't want to let all your dirty secrets out and then find out you're going to live. Ooh, that would be embarrassing. Well, this paramedic heard someone's last words that were both incriminating and mysterious. They had loaded someone into the back of the ambulance after they were shot. They were hit a few times, so it didn't look like they were going to make it. This guy had enough energy to ask the paramedic if he thought he was going to live, and he finished the sentence with, "Please be honest with me." The paramedic told him the truth, that there was a good chance he wouldn't. So this man, with his final words, said, "I committed many crimes throughout the 80s. Then he went into a little bit of detail, and he also said, "No one ever caught me." Then he drifted off and died. Now, when you hear something like that, you have no idea if it's the truth. Did this guy just say that to freak out the paramedic as one final sick joke? Or did he get what he needed off his chest, but he didn't give enough information to finish solving the puzzle? And coming at the number 1 spot, we have F.U. Many of you watching know all about Tupac. He was one of the most influential musicians of his time and is still respected as one of the best rappers to this day. I wonder what his opinion of the rap game would be when he saw all of these people with their colored dreads talking about taking too much Xanax and rapping about Heelys. Remember when black people made the blues and then eventually white people turned it into glam rock? I think that's what's happening to the rap game right now. But back to talking about Tupac, he has some of the most famous last words in history. Tupac was shot on the Vegas Strip, and in his last moments, an officer and a paramedic were trying to help him. The officer asked him who shot him, and Tupac responded with "F you." I think you can imagine that he didn't say F you, he was one of the hardest people of his time, and he was about to die. I don't think he was really going to censor himself in his final moments. But even though that would have been amazing to find out who shot the rapper, it's nice to go out like a badass.